Did you know that 80% of readers decide whether they'll finish a book within the first few pages? That's right, your first chapter is make or break. If it doesn't grab them, you've lost them. It's a harsh reality for many writers, but it doesn't have to be yours. Most new authors make one huge mistake. They think the first chapter is just an introduction. But it's so much more. It's your chance to hook the reader, set the tone, and give them a reason to keep reading. Sadly, 90% of first chapters fall flat because they don't deliver on any of these things. The truth is, if your first chapter sucks, your whole story might not stand a chance. In this article, we'll break down why your first chapter isn't working and give you easy-to-use strategies to fix it. From creating a killer hook to building tension, we'll show you how to make your opening unforgettable. Stick with us, and you'll learn how to turn your first chapter into a page-turner. Ready to fix your first chapter? Let's dive in. Chapter 1. The hook that didn't bite. The first chapter has one job: grab the reader's attention. So why do so many first chapters start slow? It's easy to fall into the trap of using a dull opening that doesn't pull the reader in. In fact, studies show that readers decide whether to continue within the first few pages. According to a 2020 survey by Readsy, 80% of readers will stop reading a book if the opening doesn't spark their interest. To avoid losing your audience, start with something that piques curiosity. Don't start with an overly descriptive scene or a long intro. Instead, offer a glimpse of the conflict or a question that needs answering. In the book Hooked by Nir Eyal, the author explains how curiosity is the most powerful force in storytelling. You want your audience to be asking themselves, what happens next? And you want them to feel the urge to keep reading. A good hook doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be a moment of mystery, a strange detail, or even an unusual setting. Think of the opening sentence of The Catcher in the Rye. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born, and what my lousy childhood was like. It immediately invites the reader into the character's world, with a hint of rebellion. A great opening doesn't have to give away everything. Just give them a reason to want more. In fact, holding back on details can increase the sense of intrigue. Chapter 2. The Curse of Overloading Info. It's tempting to dump all your ideas and world building into the first chapter. You want to establish everything up front, right? But this is a rookie mistake. Too much information at once can overwhelm and confuse your reader. In fact, research from Writer's Digest found that 70% of readers prefer books that introduce information gradually, rather than throwing it all in from the start. Instead of overloading your first chapter with backstory, drop little hints or clues. Keep the focus on what's happening in the present. This will keep the pace moving and the reader engaged. For example, in The Hunger Games, Suzanne Collins doesn't bombard us with details about Panem right away. We learn about the world through Katniss's experiences and observations. A good trick is to make your reader curious about your world, but not give it all away immediately. Think of the first chapter as the appetizer. You don't need to serve the entire meal in one go. Instead, give your reader just enough to feel intrigued. They'll keep reading to satisfy their curiosity. One of the most powerful tools in your storytelling toolkit is suspense. Leave questions unanswered and let the mystery build naturally. This gives the reader a reason to stick with the story, even as they don't know everything yet. Chapter 3. Characters that don't breathe. Yet let's face it, a weak character can sink your first chapter. But often, writers make the mistake of telling the reader everything about the character up front. They might list traits or give a detailed background. But this approach often makes characters feel flat, almost like a checklist. Instead, great storytelling shows you who the character is through their actions and dialogue. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, J.K. Rowling doesn't spend pages explaining Harry's background. Instead, she shows us who Harry is through his reactions to the world around him, like how he handles the moment when he first finds out he's a wizard. People want to see characters who feel real, not just read about them. Focus on a character's decisions, their emotions, and how they interact with others. This will reveal more about them than simply stating facts. A useful strategy is to open with a moment that shows your character in action, making a decision or facing a challenge. This could be something as simple as how they respond to a problem, or the way they talk to another person. It shows the audience who they are without telling them. In The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald uses the main character's interactions with others to highlight his wealth, his loneliness, and his desire for the unattainable. This allows the reader to form their own opinions about Gatsby, rather than being spoon-fed information. By focusing on actions and choices, you allow the character to breathe and come alive on the page. This connection makes readers care about what happens next. If you're finding this helpful so far, don't forget to subscribe to get more insights on how to improve your writing. Stay tuned for the next chapters. Chapter 4, The Pitfall of Predictability. There's nothing worse than a first chapter that feels too familiar. If your story's beginning feels like every other one out there, you'll lose your audience before you even get started. According to a 2018 study by BookBub, 56% of readers say that they stop reading if a book feels too predictable or cliché. To avoid this trap, you need to subvert expectations right from the start. Don't follow the same old formulas readers have seen 1,000 times. Instead, think about ways to twist classic tropes or introduce something unusual in your first chapter. This could be a character who's not quite what they seem, or a scenario that challenges the typical hero's journey. Take Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn as an example. From the very first chapter, Flynn gives us an unreliable narrator and a mysterious disappearance. Instead of the typical detective story, she flips the script, turning everything readers expect on its head. That unexpected twist is what makes the book so gripping. The trick is to take something familiar and make it feel fresh. If your story seems like something readers have read before, they won't be interested. But if it stands out with a surprising opening, they'll want to keep going to figure out what happens next. This doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel. But try to think outside the box and add a little extra flair. A unique take on an old idea can make all the difference. Chapter 5, Building Atmosphere without saying a word. The setting in your first chapter is more than just a backdrop. It's an essential part of the story that helps set the tone and immerse the reader in your world. But here's the catch: you don't need to describe every detail. In fact, lengthy descriptions can drag your story down and take the reader out of the experience. A study by The New Yorker found that readers are more engaged when they visualize the story themselves, rather than being told every detail. Instead of explaining the setting, show it through your character's senses. How does the air feel? What sounds fill the space? What's the light like in the room? This allows the reader to create the setting in their own mind, which is far more powerful than being told what's around them. In The Road by Cormac McCarthy, the post-apocalyptic world is portrayed not through lengthy exposition but through sparse, vivid details. The ash falling, the silent roads, the cold. These small details build a haunting atmosphere without over-explaining. Another trick is to use your setting to reflect the emotional tone of your story. In Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, the gloomy, wind-swept mansion mirrors the mysterious and ominous events that unfold. It's a perfect example of how the environment can set the stage for a mood without saying much at all. Remember, less is more. Don't drown your readers in descriptions. Instead, create an atmosphere through small, meaningful details that allow the reader to feel immersed in your world. Chapter 6, The Power of Restraint. Less is more. One of the most important lessons in storytelling is knowing when to hold back. Too often, writers think they need to explain everything up front, from character backstories to world-building details. But withholding information can actually make your first chapter more compelling. According to the Writer's Market Guide, withholding key information creates suspense and keeps readers wanting more. In The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins, the author doesn't reveal everything about the main character right away. Instead, she lets us uncover pieces of her personality as the story progresses. This slow reveal keeps the reader engaged, always curious to learn more about the character's past. In your first chapter, aim to introduce just enough to get the reader hooked, but don't give them the whole story. Let the mystery linger. If you tell them everything right away, there's no reason for them to keep reading. But if you hold back, they'll be eager to turn the page and find out what happens next. Restraint doesn't mean you leave the reader in the dark. You can still offer clues and hints that help build the story, but the key is to drip-feed the information rather than dumping it all at once. Take a page from Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty, where the author masterfully drops hints and reveals bits of the story little by little. The mystery unfolds at a perfect pace, keeping readers invested in every chapter. Restraint is one of the most powerful tools in your storytelling toolkit. Use it to build tension, create curiosity, and keep your readers hooked from the very first chapter. If you found these tips helpful, make sure to subscribe for more. Keep practicing these strategies, and you'll soon be writing first chapters that leave readers wanting more. Happy writing!